Hey everybody, my name is Chris Whitesides, and I'm coming from California State University Northridge Outdoor Adventure Program to present a virtual tour of Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon National Park. We're doing a two for one today. For the next 20 to 25 minutes, we're going to be jumping around both parks in the entire region using Google Earth to explore some overhead shots like we got right here, as well as some 360-degree panorama views, thanks to general public folks that have went around with 360 cameras and taken really cool shots of the park. But we'll talk about how these mountain ranges formed, some of the environmental considerations that made them take the shape and appearance that they have today, some recreational opportunities in the park, and then also this is a cool opportunity to talk about forest fires and learn a little bit more about them. But before we jump into that, I got to do my typical disclaimer. I am not a scientist, geologist, not a national park ranger, and not associated with the National Park Service in any way, shape, or form. I'm just a person that likes to go camping and spend a little bit of time researching some topics that were interesting to me using nps.gov, the formal website for both Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon National Park. And then I've been to the parks a handful of times, so I'll try and get some personal stories included in this as well. But please do fact check me. Please do follow up and do some research on your own about topics that are interesting to you. Cool. That's out of the way. We'll go ahead and get right into it as we start with this overhead shot to help situate us where we're going today, which is the southwest over here and the eastern spine of California as we explore the Sierra Nevada mountain range. The Sierra Nevada mountain range is just one of many mountain ranges in the US and in all of North America. Some large ones that you also may recognize the name of are the Rocky Mountains, as well as the Appalachian or Appalachian mountain ranges on the East Coast. Again, these are far from the only mountain ranges, as we also have places like the Cascade Range, the Coastal Range, and all of these plateaus will have some mountainous formations associated with them as well. A handful of these ranges are particularly important, like the Sierra, because they represent divides, not necessarily continental divides, but divides for watersheds. So depending on where rain falls in the continent, it'll flow one way or another. And the Sierra is a nice little example. Again, that eastern spine of California, when water falls on the western side of these slopes of this range, it'll flow westward, eventually out to the Pacific Ocean, but more on a micro level, back to places like the San Joaquin Delta and the entire Central Valley. Water that falls in form of rain, snow, sleet on the eastern side will flow into places like Lake Tahoe or the Owens River Valley over on the east side. Again, this is true for a vast majority of mountain ranges. A lot of them represent these divides. The Great Continental Divide, including those Rocky Mountains, is this line that stretches all the way up from Mexico, all the way to Alaska and the Arctic. And depending, again, where rain falls, that will dictate whether that rain is going to go run off in the form of glaciers, in rivers, in groundwater, back to the Pacific Ocean over here, or eastward, and a lot of it flowing back to the Mississippi and eventually the Gulf of Mexico. Same can be said for this eastern divide. Water that falls, depending on where it rains on those mountains, will either flow into the Atlantic Ocean or, again, westward to the Mississippi and eventually to the Gulf of Mexico. Water doesn't have to only flow east to west, although for whatever reason, that's how my brain works. Water can also flow north to south, just like this Arctic range right here, with water going up into the Arctic Ocean or down into bays like the Hudson Bay. So really cool to think about and just recognize that divides are definitely a thing that shapes the landscape that we know and dictates where plants grow, where animals hang out, and also where human development has occurred is a lot dependent on water and where water flows. So again, this is our big old overview. We're going to be coming in definitely south of Tahoe, south of Yosemite National Park, into Kings Canyon, which is the northern park, while Sequoia National Park is the southern. Sequoia National Park was actually established as the second or third, I don't know, like writing wise. Yosemite and Sequoia were designated almost at the same time, whereas Kings Canyon, formerly Grant National Park, came a little bit later after that. But before we can even jump into all that and designating lands, it's important to acknowledge that indigenous peoples have been living in this region far before European settlers came and started setting up. This is a park, this is a wilderness area. The Shoshonean tribe, which is a broad name for a lot of tribes that share a common kind of root language of that Shoshonean language, The Shoshonean tribes, there's evidence, have been living here for 12,000 years. So far, far, far before President Harrison uh, uh, established Sequoia National Park to protect the sequoia trees from prospectors, miners, ranchers, lumber companies. Indigenous folks were living here far, far, far before that. But we'll look at how those regions are now broken down as far as managerial services, with places like Sierra National Forest, Land of Many Uses, Sequoia National Forest, and eventually over to these national parks in Sequoia and Kings Canyon, which are definitely two separate national parks, but managed by the same NPS entity, and a little bit more so than even other sister parks like Yellowstone and Grand Tetons, because they're so close, because they share a lot of the same issues and challenges and see a lot of the same uses from tourists. And then split or connecting those two is this wilderness area. Yet again, another interesting political or federal designation to lands that we have. But we'll talk about a whole lot more. We could spend 30 minutes just talking about different designations and their different uses, purposes, and rationale, motivation for doing so. We'll go ahead. That's enough overviews. Let's go ahead and jump right into the park. Like we said, President Harrison, this gentleman right here, was crucial in establishing Sequoia National Park as the, again, second or third or tied with Yosemite National Park. And again, specifically to protect the giant sequoia tree, which is this just massive tree, person per scale. It's really hard to capture the size on Google Earth. It's nothing like seeing it in person, but I thought this little graph was helpful in iterating just how big these things are. One of the largest living organisms on the entire planet. They go toe-to-toe size-wise with the Statue of Liberty, dwarf blue whales, and even are a lot bigger than space shuttles. I thought it was crazy that space shuttles were that big, let alone. But yeah, Sequoia National Park was established to protect the sequoia tree. We also, or at least I usually, thought of redwoods and sequoias living right next to each other, being super similar trees because they're cousins. They're in the same genus, the same species, but redwoods are actually the coastal cousin of sequoia trees. Redwoods only grow about 50 miles inland on the coast of California and Oregon, and I think up into Washington as well. Whereas sequoias we're going to find much further inland on the westward slopes of the Sierra Nevada, where they like this region. They like this soft soil. I mean, they have everything they need here to live crazy long lifespans. This tree, General Sherman, may be 2,000 plus years old. A 2,000-year-old thing blows my mind every time I say it. This tree was around, maybe just a sapling, maybe just a baby tree, when the Roman Empire was a thing. Crazy to think about. But they've got some adaptations that have helped them live that long a lifespan. Their bark is really like almost soft and flaky. It kind of like peels away if you peel at it. Please don't do that. But that's because it's super fire retardant, or it resists flames and helps these trees live through a lot of forest fires. If you're 2,000 years old, you've seen some stuff, including some big forest fires, man-made or not man-made, just naturally occurring. Those naturally occurring forest fires that have been happening for 2,000 plus years were resisted by that bark. And they've also adapted to have really tiny seeds. The seeds, the cones, are like the size of a pinky nail, which is crazy to think about. The largest living organism reproduces with one of the smallest things. But those seeds are launched and sprout a lot during wildfires or forest fires, because the sequoia tree knows that those forest fires are going to knock out a lot of this low-lying shrub like this, and they're going to leave super rich ashen soil, which is the ideal nutrients for new trees to start. And these sequoia trees live in groves. They live in little communities where if you spin around, you'll see other sequoias growing all over the place. Boom, there's one. There's a little neighbor right there in his backyard. But the General Sherman might be the most famous and definitely one of the most popular spots for tourists to visit. To better get a sense of scope of just how big these trees are, again, hard to see on Google Earth, I apologize for that, but here's a fallen sequoia tree. And this section of path shows you just how massive the insides of these things are. We'll go ahead and walk right into it. And you can just see the scope, see how big those trees are compared to anything else you've probably seen. It's just wild to see that falling down probably from natural causes again, because there's no lumbering, there's no logging in this area, especially in national parks. Another fun fact about sequoia trees is that for as big as they have a relatively shallow root system. I would think they have some big taproot, going miles down into the ground, anchoring them in place, but that's just not the case. Their roots relatively shallow and they spread out. There's also lots of research going on about different trees that might share root systems or at least hold on and hug each other to give added support. If this tree is hundreds of feet up in the air, you'd think in windstorms, in rainstorms, it might need a little extra support. So there's a lot of research being done on how it's symbiotic, or how these trees, these groves, live and work together, and they might even share resources instead of competing for resources, which is kind of counter to the way we think of wildlife in general, and that everything needs to be competing at all times to beat out the others. It's a cool collaborative example of natural phenomena. So we'll go ahead and fly from the Sequoia Grove, and we'll do a quick little recap of those divides and where those trees are growing as we go to Morro Rock, another super popular hike in Sequoia National Park proper. You can park just on the other side down here, and you can hike this relatively short trail of railings out to this rock where you've got some sweeping views of Sequoia National Park and also that western divide that we talked about. So this set of mountain ranges right over here is going to dictate whether water flows westward down a valley like this, a big lush green valley, and out to the central valley, somewhere over here or over here, or water falls on the east side of those mountains and then will flow to the east and go to, in this situation, the Owens River Valley. Again, there's that picture showing those different flows east to west. And then here's a map, one more time, just reinforcing where the heck we can find these giant sequoia groves or those redwood trees. Again, less than 50 miles inland for those, and then sporadic little groves of trees throughout the Sierra in here, ranging all the way up, if we think this is Lake Tahoe right here, ranging as far north as Tahoe or as far south as, there's some like Trail of 100 Giants, pretty darn close to Kernville as we're getting down here. But those are the most southern ranges, but really, really a small area where these trees call home and can find the ideal habitat for them to grow. Let's go ahead and now jump just outside the park as we go to Mineral King, another super cool region, and one that I wanted to add, that besides rainfall, we also have different forces at work shaping the landscape that we see today. We saw that valley from Morro Rock, but here's a little bit of a different valley high up in the alpine region above the tree line that was created with the help of glaciers in this area, happening thousands and thousands of years ago. Here is a short video on what glaciers are and how they form.
Hi, I'm Emerald Robinson, and in this What Is video, we're going to investigate a very unique formation of ice called a glacier. A glacier is defined as a slowly moving river of ice, but not all masses of ice are glaciers. To qualify to be a glacier, ice must be at least 0.06 of a square mile in size and over 164 feet thick. Earth's largest glacier is Eastern Antarctica's Lambert Glacier, which is about 60 miles wide, over 250 miles long, and over 8,000 feet thick. Glaciers form in places where snow accumulates over a long period of time. As the snow gets deeper, the resulting weight and pressure turns the bottom layers of snow into ice. This high pressure, combined with the force of gravity, causes the glacier to move. Although most glaciers move very slowly, some move as fast as 100 feet per day. Glaciers exist on every continent and play a major role in shaping the face of the Earth through erosion. Water from the bottom layer of the glacier seeps into cracks in the Earth, where it freezes and expands, loosening rocks and boulders from the Earth's surface. These rocks are dragged along the glacier's path. The earth beneath the glacier becomes smooth as smaller rocks and debris become frozen in the glacier's lower layers, acting like sandpaper. Glaciers carve lakes and valleys, form natural dams, and create riverbeds. The water that melts from a glacier's surface is the largest source of fresh water on the planet. Although glacier melt, also called retreat, is a normal part of the water cycle, scientists have noted that glaciers are retreating faster and further than ever, and point to this as evidence of global warming.
And we'll go ahead and hop back to this if I can figure out how to start my video. And throw that right there. So that's a really good, really quick example of how glaciers form. Again, gravity pushing down all that ice during super duper cool periods of our climate and creating these big old bulldozers that you can see how they just shear away sides of the mountain as they work their way down. And you can see almost the exact path right here that a glacier might have taken to carve out Kings Canyon, what makes for very beautiful hiking, despite super high elevation, relatively steep backpacking trails in the Mineral King region. But glaciers are definitely an environmental force that have shaped the way that these parks and these regions look today. Some other forces that we may see as we go to an example of an alpine lake like we saw in the distance at Mineral King. We're here at Pear Lakes Trail, which is probably a 30-minute drive from Morro Rock and then a 5 to 8 mile hike in that a lot of backpackers like to take because it is a super beautiful spot of this snow and rain fed lake up here. But two more forces that have kind of created and shaped the way that these regions look. One being orographic precipitation. I said that word a little bit earlier when talking about the divides, but in orographic precipitation, a cloud comes along. In California, it's usually clouds coming from the Pacific Ocean and coast. They come along when they hit a mountain range, they're forced to go at a higher and higher elevation, and eventually they get so high that they dump all their water on one side of the mountain. In this situation, it's the westward slopes of the Sierra Nevada, making for super lush areas with high vegetation, a lot of animals, and that look drastically different from the rain shadow region. The region directly behind that exact same mountain peak, that all of a sudden there's no water, there's no snow left in that cloud, and this is the drier area, the dry eastern side, which if you've ever gone to the west or east Sierras, you know they look whole heck of a lot different, and orographic precipitation is a main reason for that. It's not only rainfall, but it's also how high you climb. Different elevations lead to different environmental zones, biomes, or regions. When you're driving up, we'll call this the westward slopes of the Sierra, you'll see things like chaparral. You'll see these deciduous trees that lose their leaves in the fall and winter. And then you'll start getting up to more evergreens, more coniferous trees like pines and spruces, till eventually you're up in the alpine region above the tree line like we are here at Pear Lakes. And then this picture is also good because the east side in this situation is way steeper. I don't actually know the reason, but way steeper than the more gently sloping west side of the Sierra Nevada. But Pear Lakes Trail is a really good spot for first-time backpackers if you want to explore Sequoia National Park and then go on a pretty mellow backpacker, single night or multi-day. This is definitely a great spot to come check out. We'll keep going from Sequoia National Park as we jump over to Kings Canyon National Park as we show just one example of a meadow. I thought this was a super beautiful meadow and wanted to juxtapose that lushness or the not lushness of the alpine Pear Lakes with how lush some of those those valleys where these rivers have helped cut. So alongside glaciers, alongside orographic precipitation, tectonic plate movements, rivers play a big part in downcutting or slowly wearing away granite rocks like this to form these big valleys like Kings Canyon Valley. A great way to go exploring these glaciers is via backpacking. And quick little pro tips, just because I haven't got to talk about backpacking a lot. But when you're packing your backpack to go out for a day, maybe 5 days, 7 days, if you're trying the High Sierra Trail, which goes from Sequoia National Park all the way to Mount Whitney, which is right on the border of Sequoia National Park, and then it dumps you out into the Eastern Sierras, a super popular, super famous trail that's a Trans-Sierra Trail. But when you go, you'll pack your backpack with light gear on the bottom that you probably won't need throughout the day. Hard to dig down to that tent, so we'll put sleeping bags, tents, things that we really won't need down here at the bottom. And again, this is just one way of packing a backpack. There's no right or wrong way, whatever works for you. We'll put other light gear around the sides on the outside of the backpack so that it's not pulling you one way or another. The heaviest gear that we have, tent poles, cooking supplies. My stove always weighs too much. I don't know what electronics you're bringing, but you'd put that nice and close to your spine to let your skeleton do the work instead of a lot of your muscles. And then finally, some medium weight gear or stuff that you'll need access to throughout the day can go on top. Again, no right or wrong way. Here's a super grainy Not Enough Pickles picture, showing a little bit different take, which was packing things in order of what you need and when you need it. Again, not going to need our sleeping bag throughout the day, not going to need our tent throughout the day. We'll put stuff like sunscreen, maps, rain gear, nice and accessible on top, and things that we won't need as often lower down, a little bit more buried. Again, thinking about keeping weight close to our spine. So let's go ahead and zoom on from this meadow as we jump to, definitely not the portal for this High Sierra Trail, but I did want to share a map of it. This is Rhodes End in Kings Canyon, and a big junction for a lot of different hiking trails. And this is a lot of what those trails look like just at the tree line. These big craggy granite faces all alongside, almost like a Yosemite light in the area. But one example of what you'll see, or when you'll see images like that on your own in-person walk, go from not the Wolverton trailhead, but down here by Morro Rock, you can actually start that High Sierra Trail, which people usually take like 5 to 7 days to do as they backpack again across the entire Sierra Nevada mountain range with a little help on the west side, and ending right at the park boundary line at Mount Whitney, which sits as the highest peak in the continental US at 14,494 feet, and a really great 14er to hike, and kind of that iconic Sierra Nevada pinnacle, if you will. Super strenuous hike. I wouldn't try it without a lot of preparation, without the right permits, and without a good group of friends to go with and support, but definitely worth doing. High Sierra Trail, very popular, super famous trail. We'll go ahead and keep on rolling, and we'll go back to some environmental factors that we had talked about in forest fires. Again, what those sequoia trees are adapted to, meaning that forest fires have naturally occurred for hundreds and thousands of years, but maybe are happening a little bit more now due to human-caused climate change. Again, I'm definitely not an expert in forest fires. We were supposed to have a ranger do this program that was an expert, but he couldn't make it because they were preparing for a fire season. So I found some really cool informational videos that I'm going to share right now.
Time for another Forest Fact Break, brought to you by the Oregon Forest Resources Institute. Today's topic, forest fire. As a kid, we're taught that fire is bad. But in a forest, fires happen all the time. In eastern Oregon, some forests historically burned every 5 to 40 years, and for the most part, that was a good thing. They were usually low-intensity fires that controlled the brush and the pests and gave more room to the strongest trees. But over 100 years ago, we started putting out the fires to protect our forests and our expanding communities. And because of it, all the wood and brush have built up to unnaturally crowded levels. Because of all this extra fuel, fires that would have been small surface fires in the past are now giant destructive fires, wiping out trees, wildlife habitat, and sometimes communities. So how do we get our forests back to the way they should be? Foresters commonly use 3 tools to limit the severity of fires. They thin forests to remove small, medium, and sick trees, or use machines to chop up brush and small trees. Then they use small, controlled fires. They call this prescribed burning. Forest management tools like these imitate what would have happened if a fire had gone through that forest, but without threatening the forest, the wildlife, our communities, or our atmosphere. And that's the story on forest fire. Check out more forest fact breaks or visit OregonForest.org.
So a really telling example that we as park managers, as humans, haven't really figured out the best way to manage and provide for these lands in ways that are best for their own sustainability. Again, that's a great, super transparent example that the way we initially managed forests in regards to forest fires was probably not the ideal solution. We left everything, we put out fires quickly, and a lot of brush and downed trees, down dead plant life, just added fuel and created some of the super fires that we're dealing with now. Management strategies are always developing and changing in order to kind of try again and figure out just what the heck is the best practice. Right now, here's another example of some of those evolving.
Wildfires can burn more than twice as hot as the surface of Venus. Their flames can reach higher than a 16-story building, create hurricane-force winds, and move twice as fast as the average person can run. How on earth do you stop something like that? We spend almost $5 billion a year fighting wildfires in the United States. That money goes to fund a battalion of firefighting forces. Air tankers and helicopters are sometimes the first to attack, dropping water to cool a fire, or phosphate fertilizer to slow its spread. Elite, super fit firefighters arrive by air. Smoke jumpers parachute in. Helitack crews rappel down to combat fires in remote, hard-to-reach places. First to arrive by ground are usually the hotshots. They're assigned to the hottest parts of the fire. They work in crews of 20, digging trenches and chopping down trees. The goal? To build a fire line free of flammable materials to stop the fire from spreading. The width of the fire line depends on what's burning. A few feet for a grass fire, much wider for a forest fire. Even the best fire lines can't stop a fire from jumping. Sometimes the conditions are too windy. It's up to the crew boss to decide where and how to build the fire line. Crews then divide the work into special roles. The spotter keeps an eye on the fire's movements. The sawyer uses a chainsaw to remove the fuel from the fire's edge. The swamper gets that material away from the fire. A crew might start a backfire to burn up any remaining fuel in the main fire's path. When the hotshot crews get stretched thin, it's time to call in reinforcements. These Type 2 crews help hold the fire lines and put out spot fires. These might be college students on summer break, or National Guard soldiers who've been given a few days training, or even crews of prison inmates. All told, a large fire can take weeks to put out and involve thousands of firefighters. As powerful and destructive as they can be, wildfires really aren't a problem unless they threaten places where people live. So sometimes, the best way to fight a wildfire is to not fight it. Letting some fires burn naturally decreases the amount of fuel for larger fires in the future. And perhaps just as importantly, many plants and animals depend on fire as part of their natural life cycle. In that sense, wildfire is kind of like rain, a natural and vital part of the ecosystem.
So just one more video helping reiterate some of the stuff that we went over. The wildfires, natural fires, are definitely part of that giant sequoia's life cycle. They, like that ash, they've grown and adapted to be flame retardant, fire retardant on the outside with their bark. And it is definitely a piece of the ecosystem, a vital part, just as much as orographic precipitation is, just as much as glaciers were or may again be. Yeah, and an interesting, just one more example of how we are continuing to develop and evolve managerial strategies to best protect these lands. One last spot that I wanted to stop, we didn't get enough lakes in this tour, so I wanted to share a shot of Ray Lakes, another super popular backpacking destination, more on the eastern side of the Sierras, but just one more great panoramic vista that you can get to on a hike or backpacking as you go out and experience the parks on your own. With that being said, definitely keep checking in on the nps.gov websites for both Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon National Park, as different parks are opening up post-COVID with different restrictions, whether it's reservation systems or just restricted activities or restricted services being available. I think the recommendation for Sequoia right now is that it's opening up, but there are far less amenities available and services available. So be a little bit more prepared to be self-sufficient if and when you go explore this park after checking out that nps.gov website. Thanks all for hanging out with me today, and join us again as we continue to check out different spots like Oceans of the World. We're starting to get international. Canada's national parks. We're going to pop over to Japan, check out Hawaii, and then we'll keep on doing America's Best Idea as we keep on exploring new and exciting national parks. Thanks all, and we will see you next time.